Good morning, or afternoon or evening if you're joining us from other time zones. Welcome to Morning MCFM. My name is Dean Esme. I am currently the Social Media Outreach Director for National Coalition for Men. We are starting this inaugural show with Rachel Edwards, who you have probably heard of. I'll tell you a little bit more about Rachel, but since this is an inaugural episode, I'll just mention to everybody listening that the National Coalition for Men was founded in 1977 and has been in continuous operation since then. It is therefore most likely the world's oldest and continuously operating men's rights, men's issues organization worldwide. It is a registered, perfectly legal 501c3 nonprofit whose goal is to educate the public on issues on how sexism in specific affects boys and men. And these days, pretty much that's usually from a non-feminist perspective. With me, you can find us, by the way, at www.ncfm.org. That's NCFM, National Coalition for Men, ncfm.org. You can please do check out the website and actually consider making a donation, because we are a genuine charity and a genuine education and advocacy group. We are going to be doing at least one weekly podcast on current issues of the day, possibly more if there is interest and resources to do it. And we'll usually try and make this kind of introductory to people who aren't yet fully aware of the scope of men's issues, or even why men's rights activists or advocates or men's issues advocates, so that the terminology varies by the person. But why are we hostile to things like feminism? Why we still believe in things like equal rights under the law, and why we think much of the public narrative is toxic. Now, joining me, and I really hope this is going to be a regular, nonstop thing, is Rachel Edwards. Tell you a little bit about my friend Rachel. You may know her from the Honey Badger Brigade, which is a group of mostly women advocates for men and their issues. You may also have found her on Medium. She's been published on A Voice for Men. Where else have you been published, Rachel?
I've been in the realm of Tumblr for a while.
That's right. You're a Tumblrina, aren't you? She loves
only on the platform. I'm kind of there to spread my my evil message of gender egalitarianism, but.
And some people get mad and they'll say gender egalitarianism means treating men and women exactly the same all the time, but I don't think either of us thinks that exactly.
To be clear, I think that men and women are different, and so they can't ever really truly be equal, but as close as we can get, the closest thing we can get to that is recognition of these things under the law and being treated equally under the law.
Exactly. Equality under the law. Is that such a radical concept? Apparently not. So let's go ahead and we'll have deeper discussions of that later. Let's just have a little fun right now. I guess it's fun. It's certainly interesting. Margaret Cho is a comedian, or I guess a comedian, depending on which phrasing you like, who's actually been around. I remember at least going back to the 90s, and since I'm an old fart, that's easy for me. I can't even remember what her show. She had a short-lived sitcom. I've seen her stand up. I always loved her stand up. I never stopped liking her, actually. And I don't think I've stopped liking her now, but she seems to have gone nuts. And what I can't tell is how much of this is an act, because she is a comedian, right? So, I mean, what we might call trolling may be part of what she's doing, but she's embarked upon this hashtag called hashtag 12 Days of Rage, is it? Yeah, I believe we have that in the show notes. So she's got this Days of Rage thing going. If you go to her Twitter profile, and by the way, Margaret, you're welcome to join us anytime if you want to. Don't think she'll deign to notice us, but we'll see. She's talking about how she was raped, which is fine. By the way, welcome to the club as people who are out with that one, Margaret. And But she's screaming pretty much, because she's declared it rage. So we'll just call what she's tweeting and saying to people screaming in a sense. And what I keep seeing over and over again is she's parroting the feminist line on what rape is and how common rape is and all those things. And she is just slamming anybody who dares question her. She, for example, last night on Twitter, she tweeted out somebody saying, "Hey, I'm a male survivor and I support everything you're saying." And she retweets that. So I responded, "Hey, I'm a male survivor and I don't. Are you okay with that?" Silence. So, and she's seen my tweets before, and other people on the hashtag. Actually, I sent that to that very busy hashtag, and no one on the hashtag responded. It's like, you're on Margaret's side, and you believe everything Margaret says, or you're invisible or evil. She also keeps making snotty comments about MRAs. And so you can go to her Twitter feed and look there. I've linked at least one in the low bar of this video, kind of give you a starting point. I understand you're not real familiar with Margaret, are you?
Well, I've seen a little bit of her stand-up in the past when I was a lot younger.
Do you know who Prince is?
Yes, I know who Prince is.
Do you know who Prince is? Well, it was a very funny.
And when he was the artist formerly known as
well,
Prince.
no, she had a bit I used to like, which was that involved Prince going up to people on a bus and saying, "Do you know who Prince is?"
Gosh.
And she thought that was cool, so she started doing that and going on the bus and looking at people and saying, "Do you know who Prince is?"
I find it a tragedy. I found it a tragedy because, to be perfectly honest, because one of the things that I'm seeing happen to a lot of the funny female comedians who, were in the business for a very, very long time, what's been happening is a lot of them have become more increasingly feminist or politically involved. And it seems like they're just kind of losing it. Some of them are just falling apart. The only one who I've seen be consistently by her statements and everything like that and be kind of divided is Whoopi Goldberg, because on the one hand, I think that she's probably someone who's still down with feminism and things like that, and thinks it's a really good thing and it helped a lot of people or something like that. But on the other end, she thinks that if you're a woman and you hit a man, you should not be surprised if he hits you back, because I think she actually to some degree believes in actual gender equality. Rather than
on your side with this. I want to be on your side with this. There is something really sad going on with comedians and female comedians as much as anybody. And that's kind of why I'm hesitating, right? Like some of the shit Margaret Cho's putting out is like, it would normally offend me, but I'm going, wait a minute, she's a comedian. I'm not sure she means it, or if she does mean it, I'm not sure how, firm that conviction really is. Because when you're making jokes, I do something about comedy. I haven't done stand-up, but I've written some stuff, and you do take risks with humor, and sometimes you even say things in the heat of the moment that you didn't think through completely, but you believed in that second, right? We've all done that. But let's talk first about where we stand on this, because I know there's going to be people new to all this who think MRAs, which, by the way, both Rachel and I are, and proud to call ourselves that. By the way, we have real names, real faces.
Hi, I'm not a sock puppet.
No, she's a real MRA. She's flesh and blood. In fact, I've touched her. In fact, I think I touched her without her permission once. And actually grabbed her physically and pressed her bosoms against my chest. It was very rapey, right?
I thought that was a hug.
Well, but it was non-consensual and therefore rapey, right?
Oh no. To be clear, we met at International Men's Conference in Detroit.
Yep.
That was last year.
Yeah, year and a half almost. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And
we're also down at the. Go ahead.
Yeah, KSUM in Georgia. It's a bit of a talk that Sage Gerard was having for his college. and he invited a good number of guest speakers to come down there for his men's issues society that was there, Zen Men, I think.
Yep. And we're both very quite anti-rape. I think you're, at least I'm anti-rape. Are you
Who
anti-rape?
isn't? Yes.
Okay, you're anti-rape. I just wanted to.
Yes, I mean, I don't think that there's a single person in their right mind that is pro-rape.
It's the internet, sweetie. If we look far enough, we'll find one somewhere.
Oh, geez. No, but I'm really sad about all these things, because I honestly believe that women can be funny, but it seems to be that what we have is a lot of comedians I'm seeing coming out that are tragically unfunny. And what I mean by that is, to really be a good comedian, you have to be able to do that kind of self-depreciating humor, and you have to be able to make fun of things, and yourself, and you have to be self-aware. And I don't know if a lot of these new comedians are self-aware. And the things that they talk about in terms of like women's issues or things that bug them are just a lot of annoying first world problems. They aren't really things that I think both men and women can really identify as being things that are things that just plague people in general. But there are female comedians who manage to do that. And I think the ones that are most successful are ones who are able to do that, who are able to approach it from a human level and not just oh my gosh, there's so many things that are hard about being a woman.
Let me just get one more thing clear, because I do actually want to talk about what I think may be going on with Margaret. I'm still a fan, by the way. I really am. You don't have to be. No one else has to be. I'm just saying. Margaret and Margaret's fans, I want you to hear this. The rape statistics you're giving out are lies. They're gross hysterical exaggerations in terms of the amount of victimization of women. And in fact, if we used gender neutral definitions of rape and sexual assault, men are sexually assaulted by women about as often as women are sexually assaulted by men. And if you doubt me, feel free to have a conversation with us about that rather than just going, stupid. No, this is true. This is real. And we can show you and we can talk to you about it. Anybody who wants to hear it, let us know. So the problem isn't that Margaret is talking about rape or even her own rape. It's what she's doing with it and the implicit assumptions about men and women that she's getting in there, that she's putting into that comedy. And I think both Rachel and I and every MRA I know think Margaret's dealing with bullshit data and really prejudicial assumptions about other people. But go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is one of the problems in all this is it's a very emotional discussion. People have been victimized. It's hard for them to have a rational discussion on these things. So, and I don't think that people really pretend that they're unbiased when they're talking about these things, because what happened to them was real, and the anger and the resentment and all of these feelings coalescing, they come into this one place and it clouds their judgment. And the problem with saying that rape happens more than it actually does, the problem with inflating those statistics is that it gives women a false sense of whether or not they're safe to walk outside the house, or whether or not they're safe to go to a college campus and get an education and things like that. It makes them look at men like they are their enemies instead of, somebody who is their equal.
Well, yeah. In fact, I would say that what this sort of feminist mentality does actually splits men up into two types of men, good men and bad men. And the good men will be on the women's side and protect them, and the bad men must be destroyed. And that's what that dialectic accomplishes. And it's not a very healthy one. There's a lot here, and there are more male victims, specifically Margaret. There are more male victims of women than anybody wants to acknowledge. And I can show that to anybody. So, and I've talked to some of the world's top academics about it. I really have. I can show you that too. But now let's presume here, though, that even if you accepted that rape is predominantly just this thing women do to men, or men do to women, even if you accepted that premise, you're still talking about, I mean, really, how is this different than saying that, I can't remember if Margaret Cho is Korean. Yes, she's Korean. Or
Yeah, she's Korean American.
yeah, Korean American. Is if I said that, I don't know, a full 3% of Korean Americans can't drive like shit and cause accidents. Right, I'm making a ludicrous example, but let's just play with it for a minute. And if I said Koreans were responsible, therefore, for most auto accidents because they're worse drivers, so I'm like tarring every Korean that way. I just am. And when you're doing this to men, it hurts, and it doesn't hurt because we're trying to avoid the topic of rape. It hurts because you're grossly and hatefully stereotyping, and I'm sorry, we're allowed to say ouch to that. Especially if you believe your feminism is about equality. Am I allowed to express my emotions and say, ouch, that hurt, and that's not fair? Am I allowed to do that?
You're definitely allowed to do that. I think another perspective to look at this from, for those who are still really on the fence about a lot of these things, is that even if the number of men who are victimized were really as small as feminists claim with their statistics and everything like that, there is no reason at all to say that what happened to those men is not every bit as terrible as what happened to women. And there is no reason to deny them the kinds of services that they would need to deal with all of that. And there's no reason to shame them or tell them that what they felt isn't real or isn't nearly as important. And there's no reason at all to say that in acknowledging the pain that those particular men felt, that it somehow takes away from what women are talking about in how they've been victimized. There's no reason to, it's completely unreasonable to say any of those things.
That's right. It is. And I like to anticipate what the objections are. I know someone's going to say, yes, but those men are victims of other men. Shut the fuck up on that one. Number one, as I just stated, those stats are very bogus. The rate of female perpetration on males is way higher than anybody wants to believe. It may be, a conservative estimate, I'd put it at about a third of sexual predation is committed by females. About a third would be what I'd be willing to defend. It can be higher than that. There's some who will make a good case that it's more like 50-50.
And it's very difficult. It's very difficult for people to make peace with something like that, because to acknowledge that, to really look at that honestly, that there are women out there who are absolutely preying on men, because not all men are stereotypically strong in the way that most people are suggesting. Not every man is stronger than every single woman. They can be overpowered. They can be plied with alcohol. They can be drugged.
They can be children.
They can be threatened with a weapon, and and they can be children also. Yes.
In fact, I'll tell you one story. I know a man I talked to a man who was blackmailed into having sex regularly with his ex, even though he didn't want to, because that's the only way she would let him see his kids. Don't tell me there's not something wrong there. Right?
There's absolutely something wrong with that.
Yeah, it is.
And you stay in this movement long enough, and you hear a lot of different stories. You hear them from different men, and they come from all walks of life, and they tell you the exact same thing. And by that I mean, what they tell you is that when they tried to get help, when they tried to reach out to other people, nobody wanted to look at that. They didn't want to look at the ugly truth that men can be victimized in this way, because to them it's something that just happens to women. And to really understand the nature,
guys who get raped by other men. Yes. That's all they see.
And to really understand the nature of this problem, to really handle it, we need to have honest, frank discussions about what is happening to people, about who is being victimized here, what's really going on. And if we don't look at those things, we can't really help this problem. We can't treat the people who've been hurt. We can't prevent some of these crimes from even taking place.
Yeah, in fact, if we want less of this crime, we need to have more serious discussions, because teach men not to rape is not going to cut it. In fact, I want to move on to the point about comedy, but I want to leave the audience with one other thing. I have now seen count them, 3 studies, scientific studies, showing that a majority of male rapists, a majority of them were sexually molested by a woman when they were kids. A majority of them. If you can't see that as a potential contributing factor to these guys and who they turn into later on, you're not thinking very clearly. You're dehumanizing men and you're dehumanizing women when you refuse to look at this. But let's go ahead and figure most of this is news to Margaret Cho and her audience. I think, though, that when I see her tweeting some things, I see some cognitive dissonance because she's just saying stuff, and it seems to be what her audience wants to hear. And that's where I'm going to circle back to, I think, the point you were just getting toward. I just felt the need to get what our real position on rape is on the table first. And when we look at Margaret, I think I'm going back to, it is a little sad because I suspect that to some extent, fear is driving what she's doing, because rape is not what she cares about. What she cares about is she needs to be able to talk to a college audience. And it appears to be at the moment, the college age audience wants to be told what they want to hear. And so comedians who won't do that don't get work. And comedians like Margaret Cho and, oh gosh, I remember, what's her name? Sarah Silverman. God, she's crazy. And sometimes Sarah Silverman makes me ill, and sometimes she makes me laugh out loud, because that's Sarah Silverman. I think even Sarah Silverman fans are like, yeah, that's Sarah. She's, but she's gone PC. And certain other comedians have gone PC, and it looks to me what they're doing is they're like sitting down and saying, it doesn't matter what this makes sense, or will I get applause and people show up if I just scream this? And I wonder if that very thing is happening because the audiences are getting more intolerant and closed-minded and dogmatic and reactionary.
I don't necessarily know that's necessarily the case. I think that probably what's happened to the audience is that some of them are like that. Some of them are like, I'm not going to laugh, this is offensive. And the others are afraid to laugh now. They are afraid to laugh at the things that are un-PC because of that small minority. Some of them are powerful people and will shame them, because that's what we've started to see that happen. We've started to see a situation be that you can't make jokes about certain things anymore. And certainly there's always been a small number of people who have said, you can't make jokes about that, you need to be upset. But there have always been people who defended comedy and said, like, either some things are not okay to make fun of, or it's that idea that there shouldn't be anything off the table in terms of comedy, versus people saying, I think that there's some things that are sacred cows that you need to just not touch.
And there's always a certain element of that, right? I mean, a comedian would have to be insane to just, I don't know, walk into a...
But it's gotten out of control, though.
Right, it has gotten out of control. It has gotten out of control. You'd have to be insane as a comedian to go into Kansas and just start shrieking that, insulting everybody's religious faith and all that just because you want to. I mean, you do have to have some thought for what the audience is going to handle, right? But no, I don't know. Maybe you're right, and maybe this is just what's happening. But I'm just putting more of it on the audience. I really am. I just wonder if those silent people in the audience are like sitting there going, this isn't funny. Why am I here? Or I'm being abused. Why am I here? Because a lot of this is really hideously abusive stuff that they're saying, and they don't seem to see it. I don't know if it's because of what they went through is damaged them to being unable to see other people's pain or what. But seriously, this isn't funny. And it's not because I feel challenged. It's because I feel like I'm listening to nigger jokes. There, I just said it. I feel like I'm listening to nasty nigger jokes, and it's not funny to me. It doesn't make me laugh.
Well, one of the things about comedy is that it puts you in a safe area. I know I'm going to say this. It puts you in a safe space to some degree. And what I mean by that is it helps you deal with all of the things that are offensive and that are terrible in the world. And it breaks it down into a space where you can really just kind of handle it. And you can laugh at it. You can say, okay, all of these things are absolutely terrible in the world. and I can make peace with it in some way. And that's been what comedy has been about to some degree for a very, very long time. But now we're saying you can't make fun of that. You can't poke fun at these terrible things in society. And so now you can't make peace with it. And as a result of that, we have a whole bunch of people who are unable to handle basic human problems now.
Speaking of which, Alan Bakari over on Breitbart Tech picked up a story that I think may have originated on Reddit or some other places. Why don't you introduce this story?
Okay, so the word is that Eric S. Raymond, the open source community.
Oh, I thought we were talking about the Tumblr for people too afraid of Tumblr.
No! I thought you were talking about something. Sorry, we'll get into that later.
We'll talk about Eric Raymond some other time. That's a developing story in the open source world. I know a bit about it, and I think more is going to break on. But
I can tell the story.
Let's talk about hug boxes and Tumblr for people who don't want to be triggered by Tumblr.
Okay, so as somebody who knows a little bit about Tumblr, I'm gonna approach this because there's
You're Naughty Nerdus on Tumblr, right?
Yes, I'm Naughty Nerdus.
On Tumblr.
So there you are. But so there's this idea. There's this website in the works. It's supposed to be the best of LiveJournal and Tumblr, and it's in development right now. And as with most social justice projects, it doesn't really have a release date, and the Tumblr for it is incredibly minimalistic with only a couple of concept pictures, and we don't really know how we're going to do all of these things, but eventually we're going to go take it to Kickstarter and fund it and fund away. But the whole concept is that it is basically Tumblr for people who are offended by Tumblr. and by that I mean it's supposed to give you more control and make it easier to block people and comments that you don't like and all of these things. And it gives you all of these options to choose your identity and things like that as somebody who's an otherkin individual or somebody who's gender fluid and all of these different things. And it's supposed to be this big comfy box for you to sit in. But the problem with this is that it starts from the assumption that the people that are going to want to use their service are all innocent victims. But I guarantee you that these people are not innocent by any stretch of the imagination. The people who need the most protection on Tumblr are not the people who really need protection from trolls. They are the people who anger trolls, okay? They'll say really inflammatory things to people and be terrible human beings. And then they get upset when people get mad. And so if you shove all of those people into a box, they're just going to kind of eat each other until there's nobody left to be on the platform. This is going to go the way of Google Plus, because you remember when Google Plus started and they were talking about the social media thing. It's supposed to be more intimate and you're supposed to be able to have your friends and just, have your own little individual spaces for all your friends and stuff like that, and you can only have a limited number of people in these spaces and things like that, and how that completely imploded in on itself. Imagine that like times 100, because that's really what it's going to be like. If you can block people down to you only have this small group of people that are just really, really nice to you, what's going to happen is that eventually all of those people are going to start to annoy them until they're sitting in a little box by themselves. And so it's like, here is the place where you go to be alone.
Let's back up a little bit and dial back for those who have no idea what she was just saying. If you haven't actually been on Tumblr, which is one of the world's top social media sites, okay? I don't remember where it is, but it's really big, right? And it's a site that's sort of like weblogs where you can write anything you want, but then it makes real easy. It's sort of like Twitter really long, right? So you can write really long things, but then other people...
Microblogging
is
what they call it.
You can reblog something else. You can like it. You can favorite it. And it's famous for having just crazy fuck people on it. I mean, you think Twitter's crazy? Oh, you haven't gone to Tumblr yet.
Well, okay, I will. I'm gonna say this one thing though. I actually think that Twitter is far worse, and the reason why Twitter is far worse is that people can then take something that you said, because you only have about 140 characters to say it, and then they'll get mad at you because they misconstrued what you said in those 140 characters because you weren't able to expand upon that. At least on Tumblr, you know who's crazy because it's like they're wearing a big tinfoil hat there, because you can look at their profile and see all of their stuff.
But this is where you find the other kin, which are people who basically identify as non-human.
So they're trans species, and
and we're not kidding.
No. And then there's a bunch of people who have this. There's this other thing. They're called like headmates, and they're basically people who are feigning having dissociative identity disorder, which is they like to imagine that there's a whole bunch of other people and personalities in their head. But people with dissociative identity disorder, it's an entirely different situation. They can't help themselves, but these people are bored. The people on Tumblr, and they decide that people like Loki from Avengers. Or Thor comics live inside their head, and or Sherlock Holmes, and they're all just kind of chilling and hanging out and stuff like that.
There's also very intelligent people on Tumblr. It's not non-stop freak show, but there's a subset of Tumblr culture that is just like this. And feminists on Tumblr have to be some of the dumbest and most obnoxious and just plain crazy fuckers out there. Yes, we swear on this show.
And no, you can't say it. You can't say that on Tumblr, Dean. You can't say that because that's ableist. You're suggesting that they're you're making fun of the disabled. You simply can't do that. That's just, and you're just so full of white privilege and male privilege. It's just it's far too triggering. But
what's interesting is that Tumblr was very friendly to people who were like this, right? And people who are like that actually will be incredibly hostile to people who like, all right, I'm okay with you being a wolfkin, but please don't make me just don't make me buy it, right? We don't have to talk about it, but they get very hostile. The feminists get very hostile. The accusations of rapiness, the accusations of misogyny, all that stupid crap, and it's just all over Tumblr. But now these people who used to bully the shit out of everybody on Tumblr, just like they used to bully the shit out of everybody on Twitter, my theory is that these people want a new site because Tumblr and Twitter are tired of their antics and their phony reporting, and they're screaming misogyny at everything. They're screaming of rape culture and rape apology at everything. They're being listened to less and less. And I think that may be the impetus of, well, we're going to have a social media platform of our own where everybody who doesn't think like us will not be allowed to be here, and we will not have to deal with their hate because they don't believe 1 out of 5 women on college campuses are raped, which, by the way, they aren't.
And in theory, the way that they think it's going to go is that all of these people who are really, really sensitive individuals who have a lot of problems are going to go there, and they're going to be able to be safe. But what they're really going to get, and this is really what's going to happen, is because most of these people who are the sensitive folks, or the so-called, the people who are so easily triggered, they'll go through times when they'll be really, really angry and really, really hostile, and they don't know that they're assholes. They do not know. They have no idea that they are the terrible people on Tumblr, not everybody else around them. A lot of the other folks on there are really, really tolerant. And in fact, it was the willingness to be tolerant and to accept all sorts of people on Tumblr that invited these people who are very, very socially, politically conscious individuals to Tumblr. All of them just kind of showed up because everybody was, tolerant of those posts. Like, oh yeah, we're really cool with you. Come on, come in. They were really inviting to everyone, and I think it was mostly a place where people originally would just blog and post art. But then those folks showed up, and now it's just become this notorious place for people to, right there in the profile, start saying, these are my these are my pronouns. I'm all of these different things. They'll have like a half a page of labels that they've attached to themselves because they're looking and searching for an identity. Because I honestly think that a lot of the youth nowadays are trying to figure out who they are, and they have no idea. There's nobody there trying to help them along on this journey. Mentorship is in part dead, and so they don't have as many women or men to even look up to at all. And so they have no idea who they are, and so they feel like they need to attach all of these labels to themselves. That because as if that says anything about who they really are. All of these things, like your race, your gender, your sexual preferences, it's only a part of who you are. Who you really are is what, are things beyond that. It's a part of who you are, but it's not all of who you are. And that's what these people on Tumblr do. They make it be all of who they are, the entirety of their identity. So if you say anything.
If Margaret Cho were one of these people, she would be, I think she identifies as bisexual, but bisexual Korean American, and that is her whole identity, and everything must be filtered through that.
Honestly, period. I think she probably
and rape survivor. So those are the three important things to know. She's female, she's Korean, and she's a rape survivor, and those are all there is to know about Margaret Cho. They define Margaret Cho, right? Yeah. No, they don't, but this is the way the mentality looks, at least to me, and for Rachel.
That's the epitome of identity politics, is that these people, they don't know who they are, and so they make their entire identity about being a certain race or certain gender or a certain label they've attached to themselves, and they might feel like they're so uninteresting that they decide that they want to be an animal or something instead, or that they identify as a different race or something like that.
I got a friend whose daughter, who's like now, has just declared that she's a boy. And I really don't believe she has gender identity disorder. I may be wrong.
Did she play with Barbies growing up, or is this...
She had a lot of girly stuff going up, actually. I know that for a fact. It's one of the reasons I'm going, it's plausible. I really do believe gender identity disorder is a thing.
Yes.
But I do, and I have friends. In fact, we're going to have Katsuni on here one of these days, and she's awesome, right? And we love her. And we both know a few other trans people, and most of them would agree. No, a lot of this is popular. And by the way, these folks are going to start showing up in the audiences, Margaret Cho, and you're going to have to deal with them because at some point you're going to say something they hate, and they're going to come for you.
Well, what they're doing right now is they're actually taking away from people who actually, maybe have some of these problems and things like that. The people who are doing stuff like faking dissociative identity disorder, or who believe that they have an anxiety disorder when they actually don't. They're just really, really coddled, or who decide that they are a different gender because that's the popular thing right now to be, because they're not interesting enough on their own. And this is what happens when people don't know who they are anymore, when they don't have anyone to look up to, when they don't have anyone to talk to. They have no idea who they are at all. And people have said that any culture here in the United States or in these first world countries is wrong. That this thing, it's far too white. It's far too first world. We need to add a whole bunch of other stuff to it, because it's simply not interesting enough. It's simply not culturally diverse enough. We need to change it. And so these people grow up, they have no idea who they are. They have no idea what their culture is. They don't know anything about themselves. And so they attach all these labels. And it's so incredibly sad, because they wake up and they realize, much older, and they find that they have not cultivated any kind of personality. When they could not figure out who they were, they didn't say, oh, well, maybe it's time to figure out who I am. Maybe it's time to develop some kind of a personality. Maybe that's what I need to do, instead of just being nothing but the material things that I want, or that band that I like, or things like that.
I think you may have put your finger on something, which probably would deserve a whole show of its own. But,
yeah, we'll have to discuss that another time.
That whole lack of a sense of cultural identity, may be driving some of these people. It really might, because we've not accepted there's something good about our own culture, and therefore
Yes.
other cultures must be great instead, which is just like a fucked up dialectic. You don't have to declare your culture superior in all ways to be proud of it. But leaving that aside, I'm going to go back to something I think. I'm going to theorize this openly. And if Margaret Cho listens, which she might, she's been following me on Twitter for a year. She might. Is there any chance that Margaret Cho is doing is straight up fear? It's the only way she thinks she can still be relevant as a comedian. Is it the only way she can get work? I actually think that Whoopi Goldberg, you use the example of Whoopi Goldberg, she made some statements that, by the way, I think were 100% reasonable, and that any reasonable person with good values would agree with. She said, she didn't say anybody should hit anybody, but she said, if you hit a man, he has a right to hit you back. And then she said, that's why I don't hit people. And she got brutalized for that, right? But she was right. But I think she was also forced into some kind of, look, you're not keeping this job unless you stop talking that way. Because I've seen her talk about gender issues a few times since then, and she always looks a little bit in pain. And I'm not saying she's come down completely on men's side or women's side, but you can see, I've seen it in her face. It's like, they're censoring me and I don't know what to do. And I think that's probably happening to Sarah Silverman. I think it's probably happening to Margaret Cho. And I think it's even happening to guys like Patton Oswalt and a few others who had no idea that people with what they would call progressive, liberal, humanist values could turn into slavering, witch hunting monsters. But I think it's exactly what's happening in our culture now.
Yeah, and they thought that they were just being nice, though, and this is what happened. This really did not happen from a desire for everyone to want to be this kind of crazy witch hunting society. It came from the idea that they wanted to be really inclusive, and they wanted to be that kind of forward-thinking good person, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the problem is that in doing so, they invited these kinds of toxic people in, and who aren't happy and who are miserable individuals, and they take that feeling inside and they make everybody else feel completely they are. And so when they see something that upsets them a little bit, they complain about it, and then they start a big commotion about it, and then they take to Twitter and they take Tumblr and they do all these things, and it creates this angry mob of people who say, see that thing right there? You need to change it. And people being, the kind of caring and understanding individual said, you know what? Okay, we'll change that. And in doing that, slowly over time, it's become so restrictive that people can't talk about these issues. They can't really talk about them, frankly, and that's why nothing's really getting done.
Well, things are getting done, because I'll say this. We're running into the last quarter hour of the show. Because this show, by the way, we're going to endeavor, unlike a lot of YouTube podcasts, we said an hour, we mean an hour.
Yes.
And so let's, and then now I forgot what I was about to say before. I'm such a professional broadcaster. What was I about to say about that? Oh,
I think we were going to segue into the topic.
Well, I segue back, but here's what I think happens, and we're probably going to talk about this more. Like this morning, I saw this debate between a BuzzFeed feminist, some male feminist, and one guy who was mildly, somewhat defensive of men's rights activists. And all I could do, and all the anti-men's people could do, was accuse and accuse and accuse, and go after our motives, our motives, our motives. And when you keep doing that to people, and you will not address the substance of what they're saying, and you will not listen to them and treat them like human beings who you might actually have a conversation with, you create pressure. You create buildup. Culturally, this is happening. It's happening. The mass media is being either completely silent on men's issues or just demonizing those of us who speak about them. Meantime, more and more people are seeing the same issues we are also coming to find us and discovering we're not what the media is telling you we are. And that is going to cause a cultural explosion at some point. There was some futurist who referred to something as called the misandry bubble, which is the hatred of men. He noted that it's a growing thing and has been for a long time, and that can't go on forever. He predicted it would burst by 2020. I'm starting to think he may have been dead on, because I'm sorry, I'm seeing too many people, especially teenagers and 20-somethings, who are on our side, not yours, theirs. They're seeing the problem, and it's really upsetting them, and they're done being polite about it. So, I mean, this really is a culture war. I don't think we declared it, but it happened because we're in the middle of one. And one of the most interesting things I consistently find is men's rights activists or advocates. I'm sorry, I see it over and over again. We're the moderates. Have you noticed that one, Rachel? We are the moderates. And I'm going to explain why. We are the moderates, because there are some guys. Go ahead. What do you think? I know why we're the moderates.
Well, I mean, I think the best thing to say is that one of the things that people think that we are is, I think that most people think that we're of this kind of conservative Republican Christian set traditionalists that want to bring everybody back, all the women back into the kitchen and things like that. But most of the people that I speak to in the movement are
I do most of the cooking in my house.
Yeah,
anyway.
are not people who want that. They want to cultivate more egalitarianism in our society, and they're really frustrated with all the authoritarianism. They're more middle of the road that I've seen. They have not been hardcore conservative or hardcore liberal. They are in the middle. They really are in many different ways. And they're really frustrated with authoritarianism on both ends of the political spectrum.
Exactly. Not that it's an evil thing to be a conservative Christian, actually.
Oh, no. Of
but
course.
but the notion that that's who we all are, no, it's wrong. And there's, Rachel's an atheist. Actually, about half the people I work with are atheists or functionally agnostic, or functional, what I'd call functionally atheist, right? God doesn't enter into the conversation for them ever, so that's functionally atheist anyway. But it doesn't matter, because these issues don't have to be looked at through that prism at all. These are real things. Boys are raped more often than girls are. Margaret Cho, did you know that? Boys are raped more often than girls. They are. That is a fact. They're abused by their parents more often.
Even internationally, you would probably find that. And the reason that happens, I would think, is more that when you look at a little boy and you look at a little girl, people are more likely to think that the little boy is capable of handling it, or they'll be less likely to try and protect little boys. They're more likely to protect little girls as if they could be harmed in that way.
That's right. Boys are a majority of actual slaves working in the world. Yes. They are a majority of rape victims. They are a majority of children who are murdered. There are a majority of those excluded from school. The boys are a majority of all kinds of things you might call victim groups. And the usual answer is, suck it up, man up, stop whining. And there's also only so long you can do that before people start to notice.
And it's not to say that young girls aren't raped and molested and stuff too. It's a terrible crime that happens, and it really messes up a lot of people. I've spoken to people that have had that happen to them when they were younger, and it's something that just kind of stays with them for a very long time. It is definitely serious. The situation is that when that happens to the girls, people are more likely to care.
Yeah, I've even seen it in the men's circuit, like amongst men's rights activists I work with. More than once, a guy I've worked with for more than a year finally comes out and just tells me privately, yeah, this happened to me. My ex did this to me. My mom did this to me. My sister did this to me. Or my brother, or my, whatever, right? I was talking to a guy just the other day who was beat up badly by his father. Okay, that does happen. But when we don't treat these as human issues, we get this Days of Rage, apparently.
Yeah, we
And
can't really we can't gender this too much.
No.
What I'm saying, and we need to take this as seriously as when it happens to girls and women, when it happens to young boys and men. We have to take this.
And this is the one that they always flinch at, but we got to say it. And when women do it.
Yes, exactly. Doing a lot of news items and things like that on men's rights and all the things that are going on in the world, I've seen far too many situations where there are women who are perpetrators in these crimes that you would never let men get away with if they were doing it to women. Yep. And we let them go. We say she is far too pretty. She is, she didn't mean it. She must have had a good reason.
She's shaking and crying.
She's shaking and crying. She must have had a good reason. We're going to take this bullshit answer that she gave when she said, he hit me, when there's no evidence for it. And I mean that. There will be situations when there's no evidence whatsoever that domestic violence has actually taken place. And we listen to the woman and we don't listen to the man. And or when it's a young boy, we say, when a teenage boy is molested, and I'm saying, or a preteen, and you know that you would never expect something like an 11-year-old girl to be able to consent with sex with somebody who is 3 times as old as they are, and yet we expect an 11-year-old boy to be able to consent in the way that a young girl cannot.
Yeah. I'm going to leave the audience, because it's about time to wrap up, and I'm going to leave the audience with a reference, and I'm going to just suggest as an exercise for anybody who's listening, and you think you care about rape, you think you care about sexual assault, you think you care about child abuse, you think you care about these things, go to Google as soon as you get a chance and just type the words Invisible Boys Report. Invisible Boys Report. It's a report on what they're calling invisible boys. It was issued in the 90s. It was put out by the Canadian government, but it included a survey of international literature. And nothing in that report has changed since the 1990s, except mostly to get worse for boys. And it's called the Invisible Boys Report because as far back as the 90s, they're saying, look at all these things that are happening to boys, and nobody's saying anything. And that report went out, and you could still find it, and then go look at it, and it's shocking, and it challenges a lot of things you think you know, and it's filled with research. It's not a men's rights thing. It was a Canadian group, a Canadian government group, right? And nothing's changed. And one of the things they said is more than 90% of boys who were sexually abused by a female are not believed. And they still aren't. And no, feminists, you get no credit for raising awareness of the issue because of your me too, them too attitude. And then maybe occasionally trotting out a gay guy who was anally raped or something and not really talking to some of the guys I've talked to who've had some really harrowing things happen to them at the hands of women, including sexual things, as children and sometimes as adults. If you won't listen, why should we listen back? Okay, that was a great show. I really enjoyed it. Rachel, as always, you're an incredible joy to talk to.
Thank you, Dean, for having me on.
I'm not having you on. You're part of the show.
Awesome.
Can't get off that easy. We'll be here at minimum next Monday, same time, same channel. We might do more. We'll see. This is our inaugural episode. Thank you for joining us here on Morning NCFM. Margaret Cho, I don't know if you're listening. I hope you are, but sweetie, it's not that you were raped. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but that doesn't excuse everything you're saying here. All right, guys. Any final thoughts, Rach?
Only that if we really, really want to touch this issue, if we really want to legitimately help people, we're not going to do it unless we really start to have honest conversations about rape and be honest about how much is actually happening and who is committing this crime and who is suffering at the hands of it. So I
cannot top that. Thanks all for joining us. We'll see you again.